Grimethorpe is thought to come from the word Grimmer, which was an Old Norse name, and Torp, which was a Danish word for farm or hamlet, meaning that Grimethorpe roughly means Grimmer's farm or hamlet. It was given to the landowner Eirik after the Norman conquest. Up until and even into the early 1800s, Grimethorpe was still strikingly small and unpopulated, with less than 500 people living here. Up until that point as well, its main economy was still agricultural. The development of the village didn't really come until the advent of coal mining, with the foundation of Grimethorpe Colliery in 1894. Grimethorpe Colliery is what helped put Grimethorpe on the map. It was founded in 1894 and was situated where the industrial estate is today on Claiborne Road. It was founded by the Mitchell Main Colliery Company, later the Carlton Main Colliery Company. At the time of its closure in 1993, it had 6,000 people working there and in related roles and places. It was nicknamed the Golden Pulley Pit for how advanced and how productive it was. Speaking of how productive it would pull 1 million tonnes of coal a year and even pulled 1.1 million tonnes in 1947. It worked the Barnsley Bed, one of the best coal seams in the entire country. Its deepest shaft was 926 yards deep, and it is believed that some of the coal from this colliery was actually used in Buckingham Palace. Grimethorpe Nature Reserve, along with Cudworth Common, were once spoil tips for Grimethorpe Colliery. Before being called Grimethorpe Nature Reserve, it was known as New Park Springs, and before that was known as the Muck Stack for Grimethorpe Colliery. This is where all the waste and spoil from the digging up of mine shafts of Grimethorpe Colliery would have been left. Up until the 1950s, and in the 1950s, trees and nature were encouraged to grow on these sites, and following the closures of pits in 80s and 90s, there was actually a push to have these former colliery sites actually turn to places of nature to give things back to the community and a place where people can be one with the wonderful outdoors. Ferrymore Way gets its name from the second and lesser known colliery that was operational here at Grimethorpe, Ferrymore Colliery. This drift mine was operational from 1915. It linked the Riddings and South Kirkby collieries in 1969 and was shut in 1973. It was owned by Hodroyd Coal Limited, who were operational in Barnsley and also owned Brearley and Hodroyd collieries as well. There were at least 3 known deaths here at Ferrymore. Timothy Jagger, 22, killed by a fall in 1920. Guy Herbert, 46, killed in an explosion and by debris in 1924. And William Johnson, 56, who was crushed to death by empty coal tubs in 1935. Built by 1904, St Luke's was the church for the miners, built by the miners. Now, St Luke's was partially funded by the first vicar, Reverend W.A. Holliday, but it also received money from the nearby Carlton Main Colliery. There was also further particular funding from a man named F.J. Saville Foljambe, a notable figure from Osberton, Nottinghamshire, who also donated the land. St Luke's was opened because of the opening of Grimethorpe Colliery. With the influx of miners and their families to work the colliery, St Paul's in Brearley, built in 1869, was deemed insufficient, and thus this new church had to be built. Grimethorpe had a population increase of 1,200 people from 1881 to 1901, bringing the population to 1,684 people. St Luke's was built with a capacity of 500 people. It was consecrated on the 10th of March 1904 by the Archbishop of York, and the architect was Charles Hodgson Fowler. There are also two memorials outside St Luke's, one dedicated to the 160 people who lost their lives at Grimethorpe Colliery, unveiled in 2003, and the War Memorial, unveiled in November 1923 by Vincent Knight. The youngest person to die at Grimethorpe Colliery was Fred Dunning at only 13 years old. He died of electrocution after touching a bare copper wire to see if he would be shocked, not knowing he was about to receive 220 volts of electricity. There are 104 names on Grimethorpe War Memorial, dedicated to those who lost their lives in the First and Second World Wars, but also to the 3 men who lost their lives in the Malayan Emergency, the Falkland Conflict, and the Northern Ireland Conflict. This cemetery was opened in 1905 and contains 12 Commonwealth war graves, the youngest of which was driver John Allott, who died at only 20 years old on the 1st of June 1917. He actually died here in the UK and was a part of the Royal Field Artillery. The oldest was 51-year-old James Buckingham, who died on the 14th of April 1940, and he was a part of the King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry. There's a lot of nature in and around Grimethorpe, and this public path will take you back into the village and has taken you through what was known as Ladywood's Forest, with Ladywood thought to be named after Mary Magdalene after the forest was founded by the monks from nearby Monk Bretton Priory. This forest was then owned by Carlton Main Colliery. Carlton Main Colliery was operational from 1876 until 1913, and Carlton is thought to mean Free Peasant Settlement or Town of the Free Men. As you come down Nancy Road, you're about to enter what is known as White City. Now, White City gets its name from the white parts of the houses, and these houses were built in the 1930s to accommodate an influx of miners from places where pits were closing rapidly, such as Scotland. There are actually quite a few white cities across England, as there are a lot of experienced and trained miners, but not a lot of jobs going, and thus these miners would go to where there were active pits, and a lot of places like Grimethorpe would actually have been founded for and by miners and their families, so they could have a place to stay and a place to work. The Red Rum pub was named after and even opened by the famous Aintree horse Red Rum, who won the Grand National in 73, 74 and 77. It also featured as the Collier's Arms in the 1996 film Brassed Off, starring Ewan McGregor, which was about Grimethorpe Colliery Band. Red City Park was actually Grimethorpe's first park, but Red City Park had not always been its name. It was originally called Number 1 Welfare Park, named after the miners' welfare. It got its name Red City Park in the 1950s. Now the name Red City actually comes from the Red City that was built between the 30s and the 50s for incoming miners and their families. That was situated where Windmill Avenue is, with the windmill thought to come from the nearby windmill in Braley. Grimethorpe Pentecostal Church was built by the 1990s, although it was built upon a wooden structure that stood here before it. Pentecostalism gets its name from the word Pentecost, which in turn is derived from the Greek word Pentecosti, meaning 50th, as the holiday is celebrated 50 days after Easter. Pentecostalism emerged in the 1800s, and it was part of a Protestant charismatic Christian movement, with charismatic Christianity the belief that Christian teachings are present with us in all parts of everyday life. We're here in Millennium Park, which, as you guessed it, was formed in 2000. Now, Grimethorpe Colliery closing in 1993 seemed like the end of the village for a lot of people, but that simply was not the case. Take here for example, we're in one of the newest places in Grimethorpe, showing that there is a real care for the local area and for the local people. Yes, Grimethorpe has seen its fair share of tragedy, including in 1896 when Frank Hill of Grimethorpe Cottage shot James Davis. But it's also seen its fair share of coming together as well, and I think the obelisk behind it is a good example of that. The artwork you can see that adorns it was actually made by local school children, a real proud achievement I think for the children and indeed the local community. There's also Grimethorpe Colliery Band. Now, a Grimethorpe Colliery Band was formed in 1917 and has the honour of being one of the first to play at the BBC Proms. They've also won over 37 championships and have even played at the Royal Albert Hall. This, along with the park and everywhere else we've seen today, shows that Grimethorpe not only has a past to be proud of and something to look forward to, but there's a lot of local pride, both in what the people have done and in the people themselves.